Okay, so we're also going to talk about the properties of matter. That's the other part of chapter 3. So there's two types. There's physical properties of matter, and there are chemical properties of matter. Now, physical is anything that we are going to measure, right? So physical properties might be the mass of an object, its volume, its length, its width. Other examples of physical properties would be things like color. For metals, their luster, their malleability, their ductile, all things like that. All right, how hot something is, physical property. Chemical properties have to do with these different chemicals reacting. So we only observe a chemical property when we have a reaction taking place. All right, and you'll see other words to describe a reaction. If you're digesting food, that's a chemical reaction in your body. Acids are corrosive, so that means it's interacting. Metals that rust, or we're going to call that oxidizing, that's a chemical reaction. All right, so physical is pretty much everything that we can observe, we can measure of the property of the matter without it changing, and then chemical is when it does change. All right, an example would be if we had a bar of silver. All right, we had a cool silver bar, that'd be great. How big that bar is, physical property. All right, how strong it is to the touch, its density, all things like that, physical properties. But if we were to react that silver with something, that would be its chemical properties. To just go one step further with physical properties, we do have two other categories. We have intensive and extensive properties. An extensive property depends on the amount of the substance. So extensive depends on the amount. And an intensive property does not depend on the amount. So an example of an extensive property would be the mass of a piece of matter, right? The more of the substance you have, the larger the mass would be, all right? Volume would be another thing, the space it takes up. Now, intensive properties are things that don't depend on the amount. So that could be something like the color. That silver is gonna have the same color whether I have a small piece of it, if I have just a thin sheet of silver, or a large chunk, right? It's still gonna have the same color. Another example would be like its luster, things like that. Now, an interesting one, I want you to think about this. The mass is extensive, the amount, and the volume is extensive, but density is a relationship between the mass and the volume that will look a lot more in our next chapter, but I want you to think, does the density of something change based on its amount? Is density intensive or extensive?